The House in the Woods. Part 1: The Escape. My name's Rachel, I'm 28, and last fall I did something I'd always dreamed of. I bought a house in the woods. It was in a remote part of the Pacific Northwest, near the Oregon coast, about an hour's drive from the nearest town, Depew Bay. The area was wild and untouched, surrounded by towering pines that stretched endlessly toward a rugged shoreline where the sea always seemed restless, its waves crashing against jagged cliffs with a ferocity that felt almost alive. I'm a freelance writer based in Portland, and I was desperate for solitude after years of city chaos. Honking cars, crowded coffee shops, and neighbors who never seemed to sleep. I'd been working on a novel, a mystery thriller, but the noise of the city was suffocating my creativity. When I saw the listing for this cabin online, it felt like fate. The house was a steal, priced far below what I'd expected for the area. Just $50,000 for a 2-bedroom cabin with a stone fireplace, a sagging front porch, and a massive window that framed the forest like a painting. The realtor, a gruff woman named Linda, warned me it needed work. The roof leaked, the plumbing was ancient, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. But I didn't care. The solitude was exactly what I wanted, and the photos showed a cozy, weathered charm. Peeling paint on the wooden exterior, ivy creeping up the walls, and a small garden overtaken by wildflowers. I imagined myself writing by the fireplace, sipping tea, and finally finishing my book in peace. I bought it sight unseen, packed my laptop, books, and a few clothes, and drove out there with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. The first few days were a dream. I arrived on a crisp October afternoon, the air smelling of pine and salt from the nearby sea. The cabin was smaller than I'd pictured, with creaky floors and a faint musty smell, but I loved it. The fireplace roared to life with the first logs I tossed in, casting a warm glow across the living room. I set up my desk by the big window, where I could watch the forest, trees swaying gently, their branches scraping together in the breeze, and beyond them, the distant gray expanse of the ocean, its waves crashing rhythmically against the cliffs a mile away. I spent my mornings writing, the words flowing easier than they ever had in Portland, and my afternoons exploring the property, finding an old well covered with moss and a rusted swing hanging from a tree. It felt like I'd stepped into another world, one where time didn't exist. But then the rain started. It came on my third night, a heavy downpour that seemed to come out of nowhere, pounding the roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. The sound was deafening, drowning out the waves, and the wind howled through the trees, making the cabin groan. The sea churned violently, its crashes louder, angrier, echoing through the forest like a warning. I tried to focus on my writing, but the storm unnerved me. That night, as I lit the fireplace to warm up the damp air, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the reflection of the big window, I saw a shadow, a tall, hunched figure with unnaturally long arms, standing just outside the glass, motionless, watching me. My heart raced, my breath catching in my throat. I spun around, expecting to see someone, or something, right behind me, but there was nothing. Just the rain pouring in sheets, and the dark shapes of the trees bending in the wind. I ran to the door, checking the lock twice, and drew the heavy curtains over the window, my hands shaking. I told myself it was my imagination, maybe a trick of the firelight, but deep down I knew I'd seen something. That night I barely slept, the rain's relentless drumming mixing with the sea's roars, and the feeling of being watched never left me. Part 2: The Whispers. The rain didn't stop. It poured for days, turning the forest floor into a muddy swamp and filling the air with a damp chill. The sea roared louder, its waves sounding almost angry, like they were trying to claw their way up the cliffs. I stayed inside, focusing on my writing, but the cabin felt wrong. At night, I'd hear creaks, not just the usual settling of an old house, but sharp, deliberate sounds like footsteps circling the porch. I'd check, flashlight in hand, but find nothing except puddles and fallen branches. One evening, while making tea, I heard a whisper. It was faint, carried by the wind, coming from the direction of the sea. "Rachel?" I dropped my mug, the crash echoing in the silent cabin. My name clear as day, but I lived miles from anyone. I grabbed a knife from the counter, my hands trembling, and checked every window. Nothing but rain and the dark shapes of trees swaying in the storm. I called my friend Jess in Portland, hoping to laugh it off, but she sounded worried. "That place has a history, Rach. People disappear out there. You should look into it." I brushed it off, but that night I found muddy footprints on the porch, too large to be mine, leading toward the forest and vanishing into the rain. Part 3: The Discovery. By the end of the first week, I was on edge. The rain never let up, soaking through the roof and dripping into buckets I'd set up in the attic. The sea's roar was constant, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the cabin's walls. The whispers came every night now, always my name, sometimes followed by a faint "come." I stopped sleeping, keeping the lights on and a baseball bat by my bed. The footprints kept appearing on the porch, always fresh, even when I hadn't left the house. Desperate for answers, I drove to the nearest town, a small fishing village called Depot Bay, and visited the library. I found an old book on local legends, its pages yellowed and brittle. It mentioned a shipwreck from the 1800s off the coast, a fishing vessel that sank during a storm, taking the entire crew with it. The locals believed the crew's spirits were trapped in the sea, luring people into the woods during storms, searching for someone to take their place. The book described a guardian of the woods, a tall, shadowy figure with long arms, seen before disappearances. My blood ran cold. That was exactly what I'd seen in the window. Back at the cabin, I found something new. Scratched into the wooden doorframe were the words, "You're next." The letters jagged, as if carved with a claw. The whispers grew louder that night, coming from inside the house now, echoing from the attic. "Come now." I barricaded the attic hatch with a chair, my heart pounding, but the dripping from the roof turned into a rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on the wood. Part 4: The Confrontation. I couldn't stay anymore. The rain was a deluge, the sea a roaring beast, and the whispers were unbearable, following me everywhere. I packed a bag, planning to leave at dawn, but that night, the tapping in the attic stopped, and something worse started. The air turned icy, my breath fogging in front of me, and the whispers became a voice, low and guttural. "You can't leave." The lights flickered, then died, plunging the cabin into darkness. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam shaking in my hand, and heard a heavy thud from the attic, like something had fallen or jumped. The hatch burst open, the chair I'd used to block it shattering against the wall. I screamed, backing toward the door, as a shadow descended the stairs, tall, hunched, its arms impossibly long, dragging along the floor. Its face was hidden in darkness, but its eyes glowed faintly like embers locked on me. The voice came again from everywhere and nowhere. "Stay with us." I threw open the door and ran into the storm, the rain blinding me, the sea's roar deafening. The shadow followed, its whispers chasing me through the trees, but I didn't stop until I reached my car and sped toward town. I never went back. I stayed at a motel in Depot Bay, shaking as I told the locals what happened. An old fisherman nodded grimly and said the cabin had been empty for years. People who lived there either left in terror or vanished during storms. He mentioned a girl who disappeared a decade ago, last seen walking toward the cliffs in a trance, muttering about voices calling her to the sea. I sold the cabin for pennies, but I still hear the whispers sometimes, faint, carried by the wind, even in Portland. I don't go near the ocean anymore, and I keep the lights on at night, just in case.